Today, we're exploring Cambodia's remarkable and really strategic journey. We're talking about how a country that started out almost entirely dependent on its neighbors, primarily Thailand and Vietnam, for its digital links, has proactively invested in and built its own robust, independent connections to the global internet backbone.
It's quite a story.
It really is. We've gathered a stack of sources for this articles, research papers, technical reports that document this transformation step by step. Our mission is to go beyond just listing the facts. We want to truly understand the forces that drove this shift, the concrete infrastructure projects they undertook, the significant challenges they faced along the way, and what achieving a measure of digital independence actually means for a nation like Cambodia today.
And the analogy you started with, which pops up in some of the source material, is really helpful in framing this. It's that powerful image of moving from depending on a single, often congested terrestrial road through a neighboring country to access that vital global highway of commerce and communication. The strategic aim has been to build multiple direct digital highways, typically undersea fiber optic cables that bypass those traditional transit points entirely.
Completely different routes.
Exactly. This highlights both the historical vulnerability and the incredibly significant long-term strategic shift that has unfolded over years, even, well, decades.
So let's rewind the clock then. Let's start at the very beginning of this story. The sources place Cambodia's entry into the internet era relatively recently compared to many other nations. We're looking at a birth date of May 1997.
That's it, May 97.
This marked the era of reliance, a time characterized by, well, limited access, high costs, and that fundamental dependence we talk about.
That's right. The very first official internet service in Cambodia was established then, May 1997. It was called Camnet, and it was managed by the Ministry of Posts Telecommunications, which we can just call the MPTC.
MPTC, got it.
And this initial effort actually received support from Canada's International Development Research Centre, or IDRC.
Ah, IDRC, okay.
Yeah, so that highlights an early international partnership in just getting this foundational tech set up.
And their very first connection to the vast global network, it was a rather modest link, wasn't it?
Oh, incredibly modest by today's standards. It was a 64 kilobytes per second satellite link
Wow.
that connected Cambodia all the way to Singapore. Just pause for a moment and think about that capacity. 64 kilobps.
Kilobytes, not megabits, kilobytes.
Exactly. Today, that's a fraction of the speed you get on even a very basic mobile data plan. Loading a single complex web page could take a significant amount of time. Streaming video, forget it. Unimaginable.
Just email and basic text, maybe.
Pretty much. It represented an extremely limited pipe to the outside world.
And the initial user base, I assume, reflected that severe constraint on capacity and access. The sources note only about 90 users initially.
Yeah, around 90. And they weren't individual home users or small businesses in the way we think of them today.
Right.
The users were primarily government ministries, universities, and international non-governmental organizations, NGOs.
Okay. Institutions, basically.
Exactly. And the service was also heavily subsidized. So the government, or the IDRC, was covering a significant portion of the cost, which tells you it was seen more as a tool for specific institutions rather than something available to the general public yet.
Interesting, though, commercial internet services arrived very quickly on the heels of Camnet. Australia's Telstra launched their Big Pond internet service in June 1997, just a month later.
Yeah, hot on its heels. Telstra jumped in fast. But even with commercial options appearing, access remained a significant luxury for the average Cambodian.
Piece of the cost.
The cost barrier was immense. The sources provide a really stark example. In 2001, just 4 years after the internet was introduced, the cost was around $3.33 per hour for a prepaid internet card.
$3.33 an hour in 2001 Cambodia.
Per hour, exactly. To put that into perspective, consider the average income levels in Cambodia at that time. $3.33 an hour was a substantial amount of money, effectively placing internet access way out of reach for the vast majority of the population. It was really a tool for the elite, for institutions, and maybe those with external funding.
And geographically, the connectivity was incredibly limited too, right? Essentially confined to the major urban centers?
Yeah, basically Phnom Penh, the capital, and Siem Reap, the big tourist hub near Angkor Wat.
Right.
The vast majority of the country, the rural areas where most Cambodians actually live, remained completely disconnected from this nascent digital world.
So that early period, super high costs, painfully slow speeds, very few users, and only in the big cities.
Pretty much sums it up. Internet in its most basic form, serving a tiny, tiny fraction of the population.
And even as the number of users gradually grew beyond those initial 90, the fundamental reality of how Cambodia's international internet traffic physically traveled remained largely unchanged for years. It predominantly relied on land-based fiber connections.
Yes, and critically, those connections ran through its neighboring countries, primarily Thailand to the west and Vietnam to the east.
Ah.
This is where that single road analogy becomes a very real technical reality. Cambodia's internet traffic wasn't routing itself directly to major global internet exchange points in, say, Singapore or Hong Kong.
No direct highway.
No. Instead, it was physically traversing the fiber optic networks located within Thailand and Vietnam.
And this transit through its neighbors meant that Cambodia's digital connection was subject to whatever was happening in those countries' infrastructure, wasn't it? Their networks, their policies.
Absolutely. It meant Cambodia was subject to the quality and reliability of its neighbors' networks, their maintenance schedules, their network management policies, potentially even their regulatory or, political environment.
So if there was a problem in Thailand,
If there was a fiber cut in Thailand or Vietnam that affected that transit route, Cambodia's international internet could be significantly impacted or even cut off completely. This wasn't just a technical inconvenience, it was a fundamental structural constraint. It really limited Cambodia's ability to ensure stable, reliable, and crucially, autonomous access to the global internet.
okay, now over the span of about a decade and a half, one key aspect of telecommunications in Cambodia did undergo a dramatic transformation: the cost.
Right.
The sources highlight that from being prohibitively expensive in the early 2000s, telecommunication costs, particularly mobile data, became remarkably affordable, described as the cheapest in ASEAN by 2018.
This was a massive shift, yeah. A major success in terms of affordability. The drivers were basically increased competition as more private sector players entered the telecom market.
More providers coming in.
Exactly, including foreign companies, and also the gradual expansion of domestic mobile network infrastructure. This brought mobile phone ownership and, importantly, mobile internet access within reach of a much larger segment of the population.
But here's that crucial nuance again, and the sources make this very clear. While getting online became significantly cheaper, it didn't solve the underlying problem of limited available bandwidth for each user. The pipe was still small.
Exactly right. The capacity bottleneck remained. The sources cite a really telling statistic from 2016. Cambodia's international internet bandwidth per user was a mere 16.31 kbps.
16 kilobits per second per user. And how did that compare to the rest of the world at that time?
Well, the world average in 2016 was 151.0 kbps per user.
Wow, nearly 10 times higher.
Almost 10 times. So yes, you could afford to get online in Cambodia, relatively speaking, but the actual internet experience was pretty constrained by that limited pipe. You're using data-heavy applications, watching videos in decent quality, relying on cloud services. That was challenging for many.
So even with lower costs, the fundamental lack of sufficient international capacity feeding into the country limited the potential of digital services and the quality of the online experience for users. This bottleneck clearly signaled the urgent need for substantial strategic investments to upgrade the core international bandwidth infrastructure. They needed a bigger pipe, basically.
It highlighted that simply making access cheaper isn't enough if the underlying capacity isn't there to support modern internet usage. You can have a cheap road, but if it's only one lane and full of potholes, it doesn't help much.
Good point.
And this recognition was a key driver for the shift we see in the next phase.
And that brings us beautifully to Section 2, building the digital backbone. This is the period where Cambodia consciously began constructing the physical infrastructure needed to break that reliance on its neighbors and lay the groundwork for true digital independence. The sources indicate the critical first step wasn't immediately international, but rather building a robust fiber optic network within the country itself. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. You need a strong internal distribution system before you can effectively utilize high-capacity international links. It's like building the highway system within your country before connecting it to the superhighways leading overseas.
Makes sense.
The key player in this foundational work was the Cambodia Fiber Optic Communication Network Company, or CFOCN.
CFOCM.
Yeah, they were established back in 2006.
And the MPTC, The mastery granted CFOCN a significant license, a 35-year term in 2007, to implement and maintain what was called the National Information Highway Fiber Optic Network Project. Sounds impressive.
It was crucial. This project involved constructing approximately 2,000 kilometers of national fiber optic backbone across the country.
2,000 kilometers.
Yeah. Think of this as the main digital arteries connecting cities and major population centers within Cambodia. The construction was largely completed in two main phases between 2014 and 2015.
Okay.
This network was designed to carry large amounts of data domestically, really preparing the country for higher international capacity when it arrived.
And the sources point out that a major factor in getting this extensive domestic network built was significant foreign investment, notably from China.
Yes, foreign funding was absolutely critical for this large-scale infrastructure undertaking. I mean, these projects are expensive.
Sure.
For example, China Exim Bank, which is the Export-Import Bank of China, a state-owned bank providing financing for trade and infrastructure projects, provided a $50 million buyer's credit loan specifically to CFOCN for this network build-out.
$50 million.
And other Chinese banks, including ICBC, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, and China Development Bank, CDB, another of China's major state-owned policy banks, provided additional loans as well.
So significant Chinese financial backing for this core domestic network.
Very significant. And the investment wasn't exclusively from China, though. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB.
AIIB, yeah, the multilateral bank.
Right. They also contributed. They approved $75 million in 2019 to further support fiber network development.
And what was that AIIB funding specifically for?
That AIIB funding was a bit broader. It was aimed at supporting both the core fiber backbone and the expansion of metro networks within urban areas, as well as extending reach into rural regions.
Ah, so pushing it out further.
Exactly. The goal was not just high-level connectivity between cities, but increasing access for end users across the country and providing necessary capacity for the telecom operators who would actually use the network.
Okay.
It really highlights the scale of investment required and the international partnerships leveraged.
So while the domestic network was being built, the truly pivotal strategic shift for international connectivity came with the deployment of direct undersea cables.
Yes.
This was the move to finally bypass the neighbors and tap directly into the global internet marine highway system.
This was the game-changing step for reducing that international reliance. The first major project in this direction was the Malaysia-Cambodia-Thailand, or MCT, cable.
MCT. Okay, and this marked Cambodia's first direct connection via a submarine cable. It officially launched in March 2017.
That's right, March 2017. It's a 1,300-kilometer cable system connecting the three countries.
Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand.
Yep. Crucially, for Cambodia, it provided a direct connection to the existing Asia-America Gateway, or AG, system.
Okay, what's the AG?
Now, the AG is itself a large submarine cable system connecting Southeast Asia directly to the United States.
Yeah.
So the MCT cable essentially gave Cambodia a direct link from Sihanoukville, its main port city, onto the broader AG network, opening up a direct route towards major international hubs, particularly across the Pacific.
That must have been a significant improvement over just relying on those terrestrial lines through Thailand or Vietnam.
Absolutely. It offered a real alternative route and provided much-needed additional capacity. It wasn't just about redundancy, it was about getting more bandwidth in.
And who is behind the MCT cable?
It was a collaborative effort involving Telcotech, which is a subsidiary of the local Cambodian provider Esacom,
Esacom.
along with Telecom Malaysia and Symphony Communication of Thailand. And the cable itself was built by Huawei Marine Networks.
Huawei Marine, okay.
Big player.
A major global player in subsea cable construction, yes.
Its activation offered a crucial solution, immediately reducing the previous absolute dependence on those land-based links.
And that wasn't the only major international cable project Cambodia got involved in around that time. Just a few months later, in July 2017, the Asia-Africa-Europe 1, or AAE-1, cable became operational for Cambodia.
That's right. AAE-1 came online very shortly after. And AAE-1 is a truly massive cable system. We're talking approximately 25,000 kilometers long.
25,000 kilometers, that's huge.
It is. It connects a vast swath of countries, originating in Hong Kong and Vietnam, running through Cambodia, and then across South Asia, the Middle East, into Africa, and onwards to Europe.
A truly global reach for a single cable system.
Indeed. It was designed with high-capacity 100 Gbps technology and has a trunk capacity of over 40 terabits per second,
Wow.
which represents a huge amount of potential bandwidth. For Cambodia, Its significance was really twofold. First, it provided substantial additional capacity compared to the MCT cable.
More lanes on the highway.
Exactly. And second, it offered critical redundancy. It gave Cambodia direct connections towards major global internet exchange points and content hubs in places like Hong Kong and Singapore.
Key Asian hubs.
Very key hubs. And then multiple onward routes from there to Europe and the Middle East. So this investment in AAE-1 provided a vital layer of resilience.
So if one route had issues,
Others were available? Exactly. This was essential groundwork for ever safely reducing reliance on those terrestrial routes through Thailand and Vietnam. You need backups before you cut the old lines.
so having both the MCT and AA1 come online in 2017 really began to shift the balance, giving Cambodia options beyond just those vulnerable land links. They were starting to build their own digital highways.
Precisely. It marked a transition from passive reliance to active participation in the global subsea cable network, a foundational step towards greater control over their digital infrastructure.
And this trajectory brings us to what the sources identify as arguably the most significant leap towards greater digital independence yet: the Sihanoukville-Hong Kong submarine cable, or SHV-HK cable.
Yes, this cable is positioned as a real game changer for Cambodia's international connectivity. It's a high-capacity cable spanning nearly 3,000 kilometers.
Almost double the MCT length.
Yeah, running directly from Hong Kong, which is, as we said, a major global hub for internet traffic and data centers,
Crucial link.
all the way to Sihanoukville on Cambodia's southern coast, a direct point-to-point connection.
The timeline for this project has been closely watched. It was initially planned for 2024, but the latest information in the sources anticipates its completion by July 2025. Is that right? Installation works in Hong Kong waters, maybe Q3 2025?
That seems to be the latest estimate, yes. Completion expected very soon, mid-2025, with final installations perhaps shortly after. These things can have slight delays, but it's imminent.
And it's a big investment.
Very substantial, totaling around $165 million.
Wow.
And a key partner in this major undertaking is China's Unicom Group, one of China's large state-owned telecommunications operators.
And the explicit purpose of the SHV-HK cable, what's the goal?
The goal is really to provide a massive boost in direct undersea fiber capacity landing within Cambodia's sovereign territory. The expectation is that this new high-speed direct link will translate directly into faster and hopefully more affordable internet service for users across the country, replacing older links, adding huge capacity.
Faster, cheaper internet potentially coming soon then.
That's the promise. And this new piece of critical infrastructure connects directly to a very recent and rather dramatic event that starkly illustrates the strategic importance of these long-term infrastructure investments.
You're referring to the declaration made by Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet on June 12, 2025, just a few days ago, relative to this discussion.
Exactly. In a significant public statement, the Prime Minister announced that Cambodia would cease purchasing internet bandwidth and also electricity from Thailand.
Both internet and electricity. And the sources make it abundantly clear that this decision wasn't made in a vacuum, right? It was linked to tensions.
Not at all in a vacuum. It was a direct response to escalating border tensions between the two countries and specifically to reported threats from certain extremist groups in Thailand to deliberately disrupt those internet and electricity supplies to Cambodia.
Wow. Actual threats of disruption.
That's what was reported as the trigger. And the Prime Minister's own words on this are particularly insightful. He stated, and I'm quoting roughly here from the source material, that this proactive measure was being taken in order to avoid delays or complications for the Thai side in deciding whether or when to cut the supply.
So basically saying, don't worry about deciding whether to cut us off, we're cutting ourselves off first.
Pretty much. It wasn't just about changing suppliers for commercial reasons. It was framed as a strategic defensive move to preempt potential coercion or disruption based on national security concerns.
And the timing is incredibly telling, isn't it? Making this decisive move in June 2025.
Yeah.
Just a month or so before the SHV-HK cable is expected to be fully operational in July 2025.
Exactly. It strongly suggests that Cambodia's leadership felt confident that their years of investment had built sufficient independent capacity, primarily through the existing MCT and AAE-1, and anticipating the massive boost from SHV-HK to absorb the cessation of services from Thailand without a crippling impact on the country's connectivity.
They felt they could stand on their own two digital feet, essentially.
It seems so. It's a powerful demonstration of how long-term strategic planning and investment in physical digital infrastructure translate directly into enhanced national sovereignty and resilience in the face of geopolitical tensions.
It really underscores that point.
That previous reliance on terrestrial links through neighbors wasn't just a technical limitation, it was a strategic vulnerability that could potentially be exploited.
Right.
By building their own direct digital highways, Cambodia has significantly reduced that specific point of external leverage. This elevates the entire discussion from one about simple bandwidth upgrades to one deeply rooted in national self-determination and security in the digital age.
It really shows that infrastructure is not just wires in the ground or cables under the sea. It's a tool of statecraft, potentially.
It certainly can be.
When you look at the overall trajectory described in the sources, starting with that tiny 64 kilobps satellite link in 1997.
Seems like ancient history now.
Right. Moving through the critical domestic fiber backbone built with international loans between 2014 and 2015, then the first steps onto the global subsea network with the MCT and AAE1 cables in 2017, and now culminating with the high-capacity direct SHV-HK cable arriving this summer. You see a clear, deliberate, and sustained national effort over, well, decades.
Absolutely.
This long-term preparation enabled Cambodia to make that recent assertive move regarding its internet supply from Thailand.
It's a textbook example, really, of how investing in foundational infrastructure provides tangible benefits in terms of national security and strategic autonomy, not just economic ones.
So Cambodia has clearly achieved incredible milestones, moving from that vulnerable single digital road through neighbors to establishing multiple direct digital highways of its own. That's huge progress.
Undeniably significant progress.
But this transformation, while significant, doesn't mean the journey is over. The sources highlight that there are still considerable challenges that the country needs to navigate on its path to truly inclusive digital transformation.
Absolutely. Despite the impressive progress in national connectivity, a significant and persistent digital divide remains a major hurdle. It's not just about the international links, it's about getting it to the people.
And this is a classic challenge in developing nations, isn't it? The stark contrast between connectivity in urban centers versus rural areas. While places like Phnom Penh and other cities now benefit from relatively robust connectivity thanks to that national fiber backbone and increased competition.
The vast majority of Cambodia's population lives in rural regions, and these areas often still struggle with very limited internet access. And it's not just about the internet. They also frequently face issues with unreliable electricity supply.
Right, you need power first.
Which is a fundamental prerequisite for using digital devices and accessing online services. If the power's out, your fancy fiber connection doesn't help much.
True. The sources specifically mention the infrastructure gaps in the countryside. Large swaths of rural Cambodia still lack the necessary fiber backhaul infrastructure, the links from the main backbone to the local communities.
Correct. This means that while mobile coverage has expanded, connectivity in these areas often relies on less stable mobile networks, sometimes still operating on older 3G signals.
3G, still.
In some areas, yes, or patchy 4G, which simply cannot provide the speed and reliability needed for many modern applications like video conferencing, online education, or accessing complex digital government services. The fiber simply doesn't reach deep enough into the last mile in many of these rural communities.
And even where some form of access might be available, affordability remains a significant barrier for many Cambodians. While mobile data prices have come down dramatically, the sources cite a figure of around 0.42 cents per gigabyte in 2022, which is relatively cheap.
Yeah, very competitive mobile data prices.
Fixed broadband, the kind of stable, higher capacity connection often needed for households with multiple users, remote work, or businesses, remains expensive relative to average incomes.
That's a key distinction.
Yeah.
The sources note that in 2023, the average monthly cost for a fixed broadband subscription was around $28.
$28 a month.
Now compare that to the minimum monthly wage, which is about $194 at the time. $28 is still a substantial portion of that income, more than 14%. That makes fixed broadband access prohibitively expensive for many families.
That cost barrier significantly limits widespread access, particularly impacting the estimated 15% of Cambodians who live below the poverty line. For these individuals and families, even relatively cheap mobile data might still be a stretch sometimes, and fixed broadband is simply out of reach.
Definitely. And then there's the issue of digital literacy. Even if the infrastructure and affordability issues were somehow instantly solved.
Right, even if it's there and cheap.
Low levels of basic literacy, particularly in rural and older populations, present another significant barrier. A portion of the population simply lacks the fundamental skills needed to effectively navigate the internet, use smartphones, or access digital services, even if the technology is physically available and affordable.
So it's a multifaceted challenge involving the physical infrastructure, last mile gaps, the economic reality for citizens, affordability, and the human capacity to actually use the technology, digital literacy.
Exactly. It's a three-legged stool, really. Without continued robust funding and targeted policy interventions specifically aimed at addressing rural internet infrastructure deficits, promoting digital literacy programs, and potentially exploring subsidies or more affordable service tiers. The full potential benefits of a connected Cambodia, from boosting the digital economy to improving access to education, healthcare, and government services, will remain out of reach for a significant portion of the population.
And that risks making things worse, potentially.
It risks exacerbating existing inequalities between urban and rural areas and between different socioeconomic groups. It's a crucial area for future policy attention to ensure the digital transformation is truly inclusive, not just benefiting the cities and the well-off.
Beyond addressing that internal divide, another critical ongoing challenge highlighted in the sources is simply sustaining the momentum of growth and ensuring robust redundancy as demand continues to skyrocket. You can't just build it and forget it.
That's absolutely key. The digital landscape is constantly evolving. Demand for data is only going up: new applications, more devices, richer content like video. To maintain competitiveness and provide high-quality connectivity, Cambodia needs continuous, significant investment in upgrading its network infrastructure.
So what does that look like? What's needed next?
Well, it includes moving beyond existing networks to things like the full nationwide rollout of 5G networks, which the sources say are currently still in trial phases in Cambodia,
Okay, 5G rollout.
and the ongoing necessary expansion of that domestic fiber optic network deeper into those underserved rural areas we just talked about.
Right, filling the gaps.
Meeting escalating demand requires not just more capacity, but also newer technologies.
Yeah.
And critically, while the new SHV-HK cable represents a huge step forward and enhances direct connectivity dramatically,
Yeah, the big one.
the sources emphasize the continued importance of diversification and redundancy in Cambodia's international connections.
So even with a massive direct link to Hong Kong, they shouldn't put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Precisely. Relying too heavily on a single, albeit high-capacity, new submarine cable introduces a new potential single point of failure. If that SHV-HK cable were damaged, by a ship's anchor, a seismic event, whatever,
Things happen.
it could still cause major disruption if it's carrying the bulk of the traffic. Therefore, exploring ways to enhance capacity and diversify routes on existing submarine cables like MCT and AAE1, or even exploring other potential transboundary fiber routes where politically feasible and reliable, remains crucial.
To ensure maximum resilience and safeguard against future potential disruptions, both technical and potentially geopolitical ones, like the recent issue with Thailand.
Exactly, you need multiple pathways. And achieving these next steps, expanding domestic coverage, rolling out 5G, ensuring international redundancy will continue to require substantial capital investment.
More money needed.
Definitely. And as seen with the earlier projects, the sources suggest that continued public-private partnerships and leveraging foreign investment, carefully managed of course, will remain essential drivers for future network expansion and realizing Cambodia's broader digital transformation goals.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Cambodia has truly completed a remarkable journey, or at least a critical phase of it. They've moved from a digitally isolated nation, heavily reliant on transit through their neighbors for essential internet access,
A really vulnerable position.
to a country that has proactively and strategically built its own robust, independent, and increasingly diversified digital infrastructure.
This isn't just a technical upgrade. It's a profound transformation that significantly enhances Cambodia's national resilience and strengthens its sovereignty in the digital age. It's a big deal.
And that analogy we started with, the shift from depending on a single vulnerable road through a neighbor's territory to accessing the global internet to constructing and leveraging multiple direct digital highways of their own, it really captures the essence of the strategic shift, doesn't it?
It really does. It underscores the years of deliberate planning, negotiation, and significant investment that went into reaching this point. It wasn't an overnight fix.
No way.
The key strategic investments, building that foundational domestic fiber network, securing capacity on crucial early undersea cables like the MCT and AAE1, and now adding the game-changing capacity of the upcoming SHV-HK cable, have fundamentally reshaped Cambodia's connectivity landscape.
Mm-hmm.
These efforts, often bolstered by significant international partnerships and foreign capital, as we discussed, have been instrumental in enabling Cambodia to assert greater control over its digital destiny.
And the most tangible, real-world evidence of this asserted digital sovereignty came very recently with that decision to cease purchasing internet services from Thailand amidst rising tensions.
Yeah, that's the proof in the pudding, really. It's a direct consequence of having successfully built and secured those independent alternative connections over the preceding years.
Couldn't have done that 5 or 10 years ago.
Likely not without major disruptions.
Mhm.
The broader implications for Cambodia are substantial, too. This ongoing digital transformation fuels the growth of the country's digital economy,
Right.
supporting areas like e-commerce, fintech, digital services, and potentially enabling job creation in new sectors. It holds the promise of bringing significant societal benefits by improving access to information, education, and healthcare through digital platforms, assuming the access issues are addressed.
But as we've discussed, the path forward isn't without its significant complexities and challenges. Those persistent issues in the urban-rural digital divide, the barriers of affordability for many citizens, and the gaps in digital literacy absolutely must be addressed for the benefits of connectivity to be equitably shared across the population.
That's the crucial next chapter. The future success of Cambodia's digital landscape will depend heavily on its ability to successfully balance these competing priorities. Continuing to invest in that inclusive infrastructure to reach everyone, actively fostering digital literacy programs to ensure people can actually use the technology effectively, and navigating the complex regulatory frameworks that need to promote both national security, which is clearly a priority, and foster an environment for innovation and digital freedom. It's a tricky balance.
By tackling these remaining challenges head-on, Cambodia is positioning itself to truly realize the immense potential of a connected future, one that is hopefully both prosperous and equitable for all its citizens.
It serves as a powerful case study, I think, illustrating how strategic investment in foundational digital infrastructure is not just an economic policy, but a critical component of national development and sovereignty in the 21st century.
A journey that shows both the power of strategic foresight and, as you say, the ongoing work required to bridge the remaining gaps.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And that leaves us with something for you, our listener, to perhaps consider further. What does the story tell us about the true meaning of digital sovereignty for any nation in an increasingly interconnected yet sometimes tense global landscape?
Good question.
And how might other countries, perhaps those facing similar geographic constraints or relying heavily on foreign investment for their own digital futures, grapple with these same challenges of balancing global connectivity with the fundamental need for national control and resilience? It really does make you think about that delicate interplay between being part of a global network and safeguarding your own digital destiny.